Hey everybody, it's your pal Global and we're back in Kerbal Space Program once again. Still feeling a bit sick, which I mentioned in my community post, but well enough to be able to record a voiceover, if not a little bit different to usual, depending on how I sound. I might sound a bit off, but hey ho, that's life. Today I'm building a lunar gateway station, as I hinted at in the post. Some of you guys managed to guess that correctly, so hats off to you. I did make it fairly obvious, to be fair, but still, I appreciate the comments and the engagement on that post. Going to be using my shuttles to build this once again. I always use my shuttles, I love them. I spent so much time on them, I'm going to get my time's worth. So I'm using the Hitchhiker shuttle again, and this is my heavy tonnage to low Earth orbit shuttle. Does about 78 tons to low Earth orbit, and the benefit of this, of course, is I can launch up the components with a transfer stage to get them into the required orbit around the moon. Now, I have done a video about the type of orbit before. It's called a near rectilinear halo orbit, so I'd recommend go watching that video for a bit more detail, but in essence it is an orbit that allows the spacecraft to be in constant communication with Earth as the orbit processes around the moon at the same rate that the moon orbits the Earth. So you're never going to get blocked from the moon with communication with Earth. So it's quite handy for stations, and that's why we're building one today in this orbit. Now, if you didn't know, there was this thing called the Lunar Gateway. This was a proposition to build a space station around the moon in this orbit for future landing infrastructure. But this was recently cancelled in favour of a surface base instead. Some of the components that made up the Lunar Gateway are being repurposed into other missions. Some of them are being repurposed as lunar surface base components, and the propulsion module is being repurposed on NASA's latest interplanetary spacecraft to Mars, which should deploy some more helicopters, Ingenuity style, to Mars. Just set up the burn there for our first component. Now, this is my second time going for this kind of orbit, and this time I really wanted to make it quite stable. In the last attempt I did, it wasn't very stable and a bit all over the place, but this time I managed to get it working really well. So here I'm just sort of getting a normal transfer and then editing it on the way to go for the near rectilinear halo orbit. I wasn't very efficient in these missions, but I managed to get them to work. The challenge with this is finding the correct orbital eccentricity in order to make it work. Once you've found that, it's quite straightforward to keep it stable. It's just getting into the orbit is the hard part. Here I'm just doing a burn to change my inclination because it is a polar orbit, and essentially what you're basically looking for is a high eccentricity, and you want the furthest part of your orbit to be on the edge of the gravity well, and that's where the precession can take place. Just setting up the capture burn here. Now, I found a reference frame that's quite useful for setting this up. It is the lunar Lagrange point reference frame, which you'll see in a moment. And that was really useful because it lets you see your orbit from the perspective that you want to basically see it from, such that the precession means that from the perspective of the reference frame it doesn't change between orbits, because the Earth is sort of fixed in the middle, if that makes sense, and it rotates with it. You'll see what I mean. I'm not very good at describing this kind of stuff, but there'll be a visual guide here, or visual aid for you in a moment. You can see here, if you get it wrong, it is all over the place. Your precession will be pretty random. So you're basically trying to straighten this out, which I'm just doing here. I used a lot of fuel getting this ready, but once you've got one piece in the orbit, actually rendezvousing other pieces and getting them into the same orbit is not so difficult, because you'll have like a visual reference to follow. What I found as well is doing a prograde or retrograde burn at your apoapsis or periapsis is the best way to adjust the precession rate, and this way you can keep it stable. But here I'm really just fiddling around looking for something, and I get pretty close here. I'm just making some more burns to make sure my orbit is the shape that I want it to be. And here I'm just trying to find a loose orbit where it stays relatively stable, and then I can perfect it from there. Just deploying all the bits, and I just use RCS for the rest of this. RCS in KSP is pretty good. If you know, you know. I'd highly recommend it. So I managed to get a somewhat stable one here eventually. You can see my periapsis is too high, so I lower it for the next round. And here I've got a loose one. This is what it looks like from the perspective of the Earth's reference frame. Goes around the moon, dips beneath it for a good chunk of time. And this is what it looks like in that reference frame I mentioned earlier. So you can see every time it comes round, it rotates to match. It's almost like it's tidally locked. That's the best way to think of it, I think, even though that's not technically how it works. I managed to get it really stable. As you can see here, it's pretty much the same every time it goes around, with a few, you know, it's not always going to be exactly the same, but yeah. Now there is a bit of station keeping involved with this as well. Every 80 days roughly I have to adjust it, and it's tiny puffs of the RCS to do it. Just bringing the shuttle back now that we've got that into the orbit I want it to be in. So when you're doing your Halo orbit, I'd recommend setting up a probe first, getting used to how it works, and then you can start building your station. And I'd recommend bringing plenty of RCS fuel and enough thrusters to make the changes you need to. Once you're in a loose orbit, you can really adjust your thruster limits quite far down and use tiny amounts of fuel to change your orbit. That's all you really need. But for final control, I would recommend using ion engines, which we send up later. But this is the second launch, and this module's just got some communications devices on board for aesthetic purposes. It's got some more reaction control system fuel, so I can keep station keeping going while I launch the next modules. And it also has on board some more RCS thrusters as well for that purpose. There's also an additional habitable module just to give the Kerbal some more space when I eventually send them up. Getting some cool shots here of my shuttle launching. Haven't really done any cinematic launch footage on any of these recent videos, so I thought I'd go for it. And the volumetric clouds here just look absolutely fantastic, as per usual. Like I said, I did mention I'm going to add ion thrusters to this station eventually, and that was actually inspired by the real-life gateway plans. There was an ion thruster module planned for the gateway, but as I mentioned earlier, that's being repurposed into an interplanetary spacecraft that's to go to Mars and deploy some little helicopter drones there to fly about and survey the surface. I'm actually really glad I set up the ion thruster package because it made the station keeping a lot easier, which we'll get to in a bit. But for now, let's get the second module out the cargo bay in just a second. Opening it up, here it is, with the same transfer stage as before attached. Deploying it out the cargo bay. Looking pretty cool. I've got to say, I do enjoy getting the shots of my spacecraft. They do look pretty cool, I think. And I'm going to get ready to go to the moon again. Now, my main concern for this was actually the rendezvous, because I'd never done it before in a sort of edge of gravity well situation where your orbit is being perturbed. I figured it'd be quite tricky to do it because obviously each orbit round isn't very similar to the last one. There's a lot of perturbance, as I mentioned, so matching orbits and doing a traditional rendezvous I don't think was the way to go forwards, but I managed in the end, which you'll see. So here I'm just trying to match as best as I can the orbit of my target. And this is from the perspective of the target. I'm just trying to see if I can get an encounter. But what I eventually figured out was I can actually burn for the encounter a lot closer to the target and do a more straightforward encounter that way. And that takes about 90 odd meters per second to fuel, but it saves me a lot of headache tweaking around looking for more energy efficient ways to rendezvous, which I'm doing here at the moment. But here I just match the orbit as best I can, just making sure I stay in the halo orbit there. When you're on the edge of the gravity well, it can easily escape the moon's gravitational pull and just go flying off, which could be a bit tricky to resolve. And here I'm still fiddling around trying to get like a more energy efficient orbit, and I realise I'm burning more fuel than it's worth it, so I just do this, basically get a more direct approach this way, and it seemed to work quite nicely. And it's about 100 meters per second to do this encounter, but if it works, right? I'm sure there's some very clever energy efficient ways to do it, but I am not a mathematician or orbital mechanics engineer or anything. I play a video game, and that's what I do. And here we are, meeting above the moon in our NRHO orbit. A few extra little solar panels there just for mainly aesthetics. I like to design my spacecraft, with a bit of aesthetics in mind, and I kind of try and think realistically, backup solar panels just in case, And here you can see it's fairly stable. I get a good number of orbits out of this, and the orbital period is about 20 days, I think, which is pretty crazy. So I get a good number of orbits before I have to adjust it. I am warping it forward here to see if I need to make any station keeping moves soon, but it's fine for the time being. Like I said, every 80 days or so is pretty good going. For what I researched, the real gateway would have had to make a adjustment burn every 1 or 2 orbits, which was about every 2 weeks or so. So I think having to make one adjustment every 80 days, I'm pretty pleased with that. According to some of the papers and things I read by NASA, the gateway would have to do about, I think it was like 5 to 10 meters per second per year of adjustments, which is nothing in terms of fuel capacity. So it really just goes to show it is quite a stable orbit, and you just need to make very small adjustments to keep it in there. But you do have to make those adjustments. Coming in for a landing here. This was quite a smooth one if I remember correctly. The first one was a bit bumpy, but that was very nice indeed. Got a full shot there of the entire deorbit process, which was nice. Final launch here of the video for now. This is the Vigilant shuttle, and this is carrying the propulsion module. I elected to put 3 ion engines on board this with the logic that the station is quite heavy and ion engines are very low thrust, so 3 would be sufficient. As it turns out, I only need 1 at 0.5 thrust to weight ratio in order to make my corrections, so I may have overcompensated a little bit, but it's better to have more than to have not enough, right? We're getting this sent to the moon as well. Same process as last time, more or less, where I'll get my initial encounter and then adjust it to taste. So here I'm doing the same process where I match my trajectory with the apoapsis of my target vehicle, and then I'll capture into a loose halo orbit and then make the rendezvous happen. Using the transfer stage for this part, and then I can use the propulsion system itself to complete the rendezvous. And actually the 3 engines was useful for that, so I guess they did have a use, the other 2 engines, but now they're attached to the station, I won't have much use for them. Now I had to do this capture in 2 passes, with the engines, not 2 passes, 2 burns, because they eventually will have electric charge and I need to recharge the batteries. So I did 1 initial slowdown burn and then the final capture burn at the apoapsis, or periapsis from the perspective of my spacecraft, I guess. And here I'm just getting the encounter, same process as last time, get relatively close, just make a big burn and just meet it in space. This one was about 94 meters per second, but with the Ion engines I have 11,000 meters per second, so I've got plenty. Once this is attached to the spaceship, it has much less delta V, of course, because there's a higher dry mass. But like I mentioned, you only need 5 to 10 meters per second per year in order to keep your station in this orbit, so that's more than enough. Getting the final tweaks here, and we'll be making a encounter with the station. Now I used some structural parts to make it into a golden foil. I tried to base it loosely off of the real design of the propulsion module. It's much smaller than the real one, my one, but I just decided to put some little bits on it just to make it look cool. I put one of the magneto booms on, and that just gives the station some shape. Coming up to the target here and docking it onto the end where the big solar panels are. I did mention I only use one of the ion thrusters, and that's at a 0.5 thrust limit. You can see we're in orbit here, we've got all of the bits and bobs deployed, and here is a shot of the station. It's not the biggest station in the world, but it should act as a nice outpost around the moon for future crewed missions. And this is what the station keeping looks like. Very, very laggy. That's not the video. That's not YouTube, excuse me, that is the video. That's what I meant to say. This is what it looks like. Or using one Ion engine, thrusting at 0.5 limiter, and I'm basically sort of reeling it in, so all of these orbits from the future, and I was just bringing it in so I have more time between correction burns. And here we're re-entering the Vigilant to return to the Kerbal Space Center. That Ion thruster is great. It was really, really useful. The RCS was still too powerful, even on the lowest settings. So having that one Ion thruster to make really, really fine adjustments is really handy. Now we've got plenty of altitude here to play with, so we're going to do a little sort of spin here, I guess, to lower my altitude and get rid of some energy. And we're just going for the landing. I was quite happy with this approach. It was just a nice little glide. And I think we had another smooth little touchdown, which is nice. There we are. That is a Lunar Gateway Station in Kerbal Space Program. I plan on doing a crewed mission from it, so keep an eye out for that. Cheers!